مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. يتفق الكل على وجود خلل في واشنطن. نظامنا لا يعمل. الرئيس والكونغرس لا يتحدثان إلى بعضهما البعض. الكونغرس لا يكر القوانين. الرئيس لا يلتزم بالقوانين التي يتم إقرارها. والشعب الأمريكي يكره هذا الوضع. على مر العام الفائت طلبت من ضيوفنا أن يلوحوا بأساهم السخرية ويقدموا أفكارا محددة للعلاج لمشكلات في نظامنا السياسي. كان لدى كل شخص فكرة. بعض الإجابات تقنية وبعضها عميقة. كلها رائعة وكلها ستصنع فارقا. وفيما يلي ما قالوه. Tim, the whole point of the show is to explain to our viewers how Washington works or doesn't work, as the case may be. But if you could take your magic wand and repair some part of Washington, some process or something that isn't working that you think should be working better, what would that be?
Well, there are a lot of good options, a lot of viable candidates for that magic wand to be waved over, Rob. I would personally say that the outside groups, and when I say outside groups, I'm talking about advocacy organizations that raise millions and millions of dollars, and they raise that money essentially by attacking candidates and parties and ideas. These outside groups have really entrenched themselves as even more powerful now than the party structure itself. For example, some of the very conservative, powerful conservative outside groups, such as Heritage Action for America, the Club for Growth, Americans for Tax Reform, they hold so much power, so much influence in Washington over the Republican Party that members of the Republican Party, especially in the House of Representatives, where, as we've outlined, some of the members are very, very conservative. These conservative members, they feel more of a responsibility, in some cases, to these outside groups than they do to the party apparatus or even to their constituents back home. Now, the reason for that is, of course, money. These outside groups swoop into their districts, wherever they may be, whether they're out on the far west coast in Idaho or in a very, very wealthy suburb of New York City. These outside groups, especially the Club for Growth, they will come in to a Republican primary election and they will flood the airwaves. They'll drop hundreds of thousands of dollars in negative advertising against the more moderate Republican candidate in order to send the most conservative candidate to Washington. Well, of course, Rob, once that conservative candidate gets to Washington, what is he afraid of? He's afraid of voting against that group's interests, because if he does so, that group will go right back into his district and find a more conservative candidate to challenge him in the upcoming primary election. Now, this happens on both sides of the aisle. Don't get me wrong. It happens with Democrats and big liberal organizations, but the liberal organizations have not grown nearly as powerful. They are not nearly as influential at this point as some of these big conservative outside groups, and I think a lot of frustration is felt within the Republican Party right now because they look at these outside groups and think they are dictating the agenda. They are sort of holding these Republican congressmen hostage, where these lawmakers might be persuaded to go along with a more reasonable, a more practical set of solutions, if not for this gripping fear of these outside groups and the money that they possess to knock them out of office.
So, Kevin, as I explained, this show beams out to Arab viewers, and the purpose is to explain how Washington works, or doesn't work, as the case may be. So, given your experience in the Pentagon, if you could wave your magic wand and fix or repair or correct something that you have seen or witnessed that you think needs fixing or correction, what would that be?
Well, I've covered the Washington process for a lot of years, and I think something right now that's pretty detrimental is the lack of knowledge of how the military works and of international affairs in general by the U.S. Congress. and by the other leadership of the federal government in Washington. There's been a big generational change in those 10 years. A lot of older senators and members who lived through the Cold War, who lived through a lot of global security issues and crises, are gone. They've died off, they've left, they retired, and there's a new crop. Some of those new crop were direct fighters in the war. There are some veterans who are part of Congress now, but there are a lot who have very little interest in what goes on in the rest of the world. And there's a reaction in America to those last 10 years of war to say, let's focus on America back home. We're tired of spending money, we're tired of spending blood and sending our boys to die for other people's battles. That makes it very difficult in the Pentagon to try to convince the American people, wait, we need to have a military that's this size, or spend this much money, or buy these kinds of high-end weaponry to protect the rest of the world, or American interests far away in the rest of the world that aren't as obvious to Americans, to voters who are putting these members of Congress in office. It's a difficult time now where members of Congress know they have to keep close watch on America's finances while America decides how much of the world's security are we going to be in charge of? Are we going to own and pay for? So that's one thing I think would help.
Okay. So, Bill, I explained at the outset this show beams out to Arab viewers, and it tries to explain how Washington works, or doesn't work, as the case may be.
Sure.
So if you, based on your experience, could wave a magic wand and fix or correct or repair some aspect of Washington that, in your experience, needs fixing or correcting, what would that be?
Comedy in the Congress. There was a time, and there was a long time, where there were leaders of both parties who were exceptional men and who reached across the aisle to try to solve problems mutually. Nowadays, you don't have that. You really don't have. There are very few. There might be a small handful that try, but without success. That would be, if there was one thing I could change, that's the thing I would change. That leaders would emerge from both the Democratic and Republican aisles to try to work together on solving problems, real problems, and we have many of them. And that's something that really needs to be done, and I'm not sure how it gets done.
So as I said, this show beams out to the Middle East, and it's designed to explain to Arab viewers how Washington works, or doesn't work, as the case may be. So based on your experience, either with the military or what you've been reporting on, if you could wave your magic wand and fix or correct or repair some aspect of Washington that you think needs fixing or correcting, what would that be?
I think one of the reasons why a lot of Americans don't have faith in Washington and don't have faith that their government is working for them is that Washington is awash in an unlimited amount of money that is spread around by what we would call special interests, corporations, particular groups of people that have an ideology that they want to push. And I think reasoned debate, reasoned research about public policy problems has kind of been shunted to the side because we have this environment now where it's this free-for-all, who can spend more money to get more done in their interest. And I think there is obviously a need for people to have a voice, and sometimes voice is money. You hire an organization to advocate for your position, I think that's fine, but I think if there was a way to institute some more limits, particularly on the amount of money, because right now it's basically unlimited. And I think in the process, we have a government that I don't think the people that are running it feel like they're bought, but I think if you see what comes in and you see what comes out, it's very difficult to not believe that they're being bought.
You know, this show beams out to Arab viewers, and it's designed to to inform people about how Washington works or doesn't work, as the case may be.
Yes.
From your experience, if you could wave a magic wand and repair, or fix, or correct something about either what you do or the overall system in which you operate, what would that be?
You know, this is maybe a cop-out, but I wouldn't change a lot. What do I mean by that? Washington is full of bureaucracy. People sometimes talk about gridlock in Washington, you know, paralysis in Washington. But the way I see it, I'm a big believer in the original view of the founders of the United States, who saw that you need to have balance of power. You need to have limits to what government can do. So I'm often extremely frustrated by the bureaucracy in Washington and the kind of categories and the limitations that we have and the limits in getting things done. And some of that is sometimes stupid or foolish or limiting. But I look back at the founders and look back at the wisdom of the people who founded the United States of America and how they sought to limit the power of the state. So if the lesson that I see from everything that I see in Washington is that, yes, there are many frustrations, but limiting the power of Leviathan, limiting the power of the state, of any state, is not necessarily a bad thing.
So Ken, as I explained, this show beams out to Arab viewers to help explain how Washington either works or doesn't work, as the case may be. From your vantage point, if you could wave a magic wand and repair or correct or fix some part of Washington that you've observed needs repairing, what would that be?
Campaign finance reform. The election system in the United States, unique in the world, is overflowing with dollars, with money, with the notion that an individual's or a company's contributions to election campaigning is speech protected by the First Amendment. I've never bought that argument. I don't think that argument is valid myself. I don't think it should prevail. But it is the law. And right now, I would say one of the greatest obstacles to more effective governing in the United States is the campaign finance laws, which permit practically unlimited contributions. And I think that is very disadvantageous and harmful to American democracy.
So this show beams out to the Middle East. We try to explain how Washington works or doesn't work, as the case may be. But if you could wave your magic wand and repair or fix one part of the congressional or Washington or foreign policy-making process that you think needs fixing or repairing, what would that be?
One part of the foreign policy area?
Something in your experience here as a congressman that you see broken. Some rules, some process, some Washington tradition that you think just needs to be fixed. What would that be?
I think that Washington would function much more smoothly if the role that money plays in our political system was diminished. If the money were taken out of politics and political campaigns could be run solely on ideas, without all these outside groups that participate in our elections in a way that so many of your viewers probably can't even imagine, although they've read about them. If we could do that, it would free up, frankly, more time for us to be able to focus on the important issues, particularly in the foreign policy area. There would be, I believe, a greater willingness on the part of more of my colleagues who don't think about foreign policy on a regular basis to actually engage in those issues, understanding that they're vital to our nation's interest, and that they will have more time to put those on their agenda, where I think these issues belong for all of my colleagues.
So Mr. Secretary, this show goes out to Arab viewers and it tries to explain to them how American politics and the decision-making process works or doesn't work, as the case may be. But if you could wave your magic wand and repair some part of our political or policy-making system that you think is broken, what would you do?
I would eliminate as much of the money in politics as I possibly could. I think it has been very corrupting of the process. I know I've talked to some of my former colleagues who between now and next spring have fundraising events, breakfast, lunch, and dinner from now until the end of the year, every day that Congress is in session. So you have this money chase taking place. You have Senate races that now will cost $100 million. You have presidential races that go for $1 billion and more apiece. And so you're out there raising money at a time when you should be focusing on legislation. And by the way, I think the public would be really outraged if they saw how members of Congress have to run a gauntlet to get to the House or Senate floor, to go through the lobbyists who are gathered there, pulling on their jackets. Don't forget, we supported you. Vote up, vote down, grabbing you by the shirt, reminding you that they were supporting you financially. I think it's obviously part of the democratic process, free speech, but I think it's been carried too far, and I think there ought to be some campaign reform that says, let's take as much money as we can, let's have some decent limits so that people have a fair chance to compete. But when one person, during the last campaign pledged $100 million to one campaign, if you take 10 people of that magnitude, so now you've got $1 billion in 10 people. How is that a part of the democratic process? So that would be the one change that I would make, in addition to trying to find a way back to talking about how we reach a consensus on key issues. There are always going to be differences philosophically, but on key issues, whether you pay your debts, shouldn't that be a bipartisan solution? Shouldn't it be bipartisan when it comes to national security, foreign policy? We can debate the budget issue, and I think it's really good that they're focused on how we reduce the deficit. But there are ways to do, we know what to do. There are solutions to our problems. Yes, we have a $16 trillion debt, but there are ways to confront that, both on the entitlement side, on the revenue side. We know what has to be done. We had the Simpson-Bowles Commission. I was just astonished to watch what happened when the sequester went into effect. You would think with 535 members of Congress, well, it may be hard to get an agreement. But let's just put 12 people around this table. 12 people, surely you 12, who are highly intelligent, motivated, et cetera, can come up with $1.2 trillion over 10 years. Can't you? The answer was no. So there's something wrong with the process when 12 people out of the 535 can't come to an agreement on a fraction of the debt that is accumulating as we speak.
All right, so this show, as you know, beams out to the Middle East, and it's designed to explain to Arab viewers how Washington works or doesn't work, as the case may be. But if you could wave your magic wand and repair some part of Washington that you think is broken, some system, some process, something you've come across in your reporting that you think, you know what, this is broken, this needs fixing, what would that be?
I would say two things, which I'll try to say very concisely. One is, in the old days, members of Congress were encouraged and routinely traveled the world to understand the world better, and they also traveled in a bipartisan way. They became friends with adversaries in the other political party, and there's been such a backlash against that in American politics, where the public thinks it's a huge waste of time and money and it's terrible, and the two parties have really separated, partly because they don't spend as much time traveling together, partly because they don't spend as much time living in Washington, because they're accused of being out of touch with their constituents. And I think that that would go a long way towards repairing the other thing that I would identify as really a problem in Washington, is a lack of civility and cooperation. We do see it some and selectively on certain issues and certain fights, but I think there's a lack of intellectual honesty. There's a lack of, on the Obamacare fight, for instance, we've seen Republicans in a very, very fierce way say this is a terrible policy to have a national health care system, but they don't want to fix it. They want to kill it. And Democrats have sort of reverted to this is our policy, and they've defended it kind of reflexively. And instead of people working together to really fix the problems, they're more about winning the fights as they come up so that they can take full credit for what goes on. So I think those two issues I would really try to work on.
بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول أفكاركم الخاصة لإصلاح نظامنا السياسي، أرجو أن تتصلوا بي مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@elhura.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.